There's a mountain where 1 out of every 4 climbers who reach the summit dies on the way down. A place where the death rate isn't 1 or 2%, like Everest, but 23%. Nearly 1 in 4. Where storms arrive without warning, winds exceed 100 miles per hour, and temperatures drop to -60 degrees Celsius. Where ice cliffs the size of buildings collapse without provocation, and where rescue, if you need it, is almost always impossible. This mountain has a name: K2, the Savage Mountain. And it sits at the heart of one of the most brutal, beautiful, and unforgiving mountain ranges on Earth, the Karakoram. While most people have heard of the Himalayas, few know the Karakoram. Yet this 500-kilometer spine of rock and ice, stretching across Pakistan, China, and India, contains 4 of the world's 14 8,000-meter peaks. It holds more concentrated high-altitude terrain than anywhere else on the planet. And it has killed more climbers per summit attempt than any other range. The Karakoram doesn't invite exploration. It resists it, punishes it. And yet, people come. Not because it's easy, but because it's the ultimate test. This is the story of mountains that don't forgive mistakes. Of a highway built at the cost of 892 lives. Of valleys where ancient kingdoms survived in total isolation. And of a place where nature, not humans, holds absolute authority. This is the Karakoram, and it doesn't care if you're ready. At 8,611 meters, K2 is the second highest mountain on Earth. But altitude alone doesn't explain its reputation. Everest is taller, but K2 is deadlier, far deadlier. The numbers tell the story. As of 2025, approximately 800 climbers have reached K2's summit, but 96 have died trying. That's a fatality rate of 12% historically. In earlier decades, it was closer to 25%. 1 death for every 4 summits. Compare that to Everest, where the death rate hovers around 1 to 3%, and you begin to understand why climbers call K2 the Savage Mountain. A name earned in blood, ice, and broken bodies left on its slopes. The mountain's reputation crystallized in 2008. On August 1st, disaster struck. 11 climbers died in a single day. The largest loss of life in K2's history. What happened wasn't a single catastrophe. It was a cascade of failures, each amplifying the next. A massive serac, an unstable tower of ice, collapsed near the summit. The falling ice severed fixed ropes that climbers depended on for descent. Without those ropes, teams were stranded at 8,200 meters in what mountaineers call the bottleneck. The bottleneck is K2's most infamous feature. A narrow, steep couloir directly beneath a hanging glacier. To reach the summit, every climber must pass through it, and overhead, tons of ice hang precariously, held in place by nothing but physics and luck. When the serac fell, chaos followed. Some climbers attempted to descend without ropes. Others waited, hoping for rescue that never came. Avalanches swept away those who hesitated. Exhaustion claimed those who moved too slowly. And the mountain, indifferent to human suffering, simply continued being what it is: a killing machine. The survivors told stories of bodies left behind, of climbers too exhausted to help each other, of decisions made in the thin air of the death zone, where oxygen deprivation turns every choice into a gamble. K2 doesn't offer easy routes. Every approach is technical: steep ice faces, exposed ridges, rockfall, crevasses that swallow climbers whole, and weather that shifts from manageable to deadly in minutes. Unlike Everest, which has a climbing season with relatively predictable weather windows, K2's weather is erratic year-round. Storms arrive with little warning. Winds that can knock a person off their feet are routine. And temperatures that freeze exposed skin in under a minute are the norm, not the exception. There's another factor: psychology. Everest, for all its dangers, feels achievable. Hundreds of people summit each year. There's infrastructure, guides, fixed ropes, bottled oxygen, the illusion, at least, of control. K2 offers none of that. Summiting K2 requires not just physical fitness, but technical climbing skill, high altitude experience, and a kind of mental resilience that few possess. You're not just climbing a mountain, you're betting your life that you can endure conditions designed to kill you. American climber George Bell, who attempted K2 in 1953, described it best: "It's a savage mountain that tries to kill you." That quote has defined the mountain ever since, because K2 doesn't just challenge climbers, it actively tries to eliminate them. And yet, they come. Because for mountaineers, K2 represents the pinnacle. If Everest is the trophy, K2 is the test, the mountain that separates the skilled from the merely ambitious, the survivors from the statistics. Standing at K2's base camp, surrounded by the Baltoro Glacier's expanse of ice and rock, you feel it. The mountain looming overhead, its pyramid shape almost perfect against the sky. Beautiful, majestic, and utterly inescapably dangerous. More people have been to space than have stood on K2's summit, and that statistic isn't changing anytime soon. To reach K2, you must first cross the Baltoro Glacier, one of the longest glaciers outside the polar regions, stretching 63 kilometers through the heart of the Karakoram. The Baltoro isn't a smooth ice field, it's a chaotic labyrinth of crevasses, seracs, and moraine. Walking on, it feels like navigating a frozen battlefield. Ice towers rise and collapse. Hidden crevasses lurk beneath thin snow bridges, and the surface shifts constantly, groaning and cracking as the glacier moves downhill at inches per day. The trek to K2 base camp takes roughly a week from the village of Ascole. Porters, often Balti men from nearby valleys, carry supplies. Tents, food, climbing gear. Everything needed for an expedition that might last months. These porters are the unsung heroes of Karakoram mountaineering. They walk barefoot or in thin sandals across terrain that would challenge experienced trekkers in boots. They carry loads exceeding 25 kilograms over ice and rock. And they do it for wages that barely support their families. Without them, K2 expeditions wouldn't happen. Yet their stories are rarely told. Their sacrifices rarely acknowledged. They are the invisible foundation upon which mountaineering glory is built. The Baltoro is also stunningly beautiful. Surrounded by peaks that exceed 7,000 meters, the glacier winds through landscapes that feel more lunar than terrestrial. The Trango Towers rise to the south, sheer granite walls over 1,000 meters tall. Masherbrum dominates the horizon to the west, its summit often shrouded in clouds. And at the glacier's head, K2. Always K2. Growing larger with each day's march until it dominates everything. A pyramid of ice and rock that feels less like a mountain and more like a monument to nature's indifference. Reaching base camp at 5,150 meters is both arrival and beginning. The real climb hasn't started, but the altitude is already noticeable. Breath comes harder, sleep is fitful, headaches are common, and every exertion, from boiling water to putting on boots, feels exhausting. This is acclimatization. The body's slow, painful adjustment to thin air. Without it, climbers risk pulmonary edema, cerebral edema, and death. So they wait. Days, sometimes weeks, climbing to higher camps, then descending. Repeating the cycle until their bodies adapt enough to survive at altitudes where oxygen levels are 1/3 of sea level. The Baltoro Glacier is more than a route. It's a threshold, a place where the modern world ends and something older, harsher, and utterly unforgiving begins. Not everything in the Karakoram is defined by death and difficulty. There are places where people have lived for centuries, carving out lives in valleys that seem impossibly remote. Hunza Valley is one of them. Sitting at elevations between 2,000 and 2,500 meters, Hunza is often called the last Shangri-La, a reference to the fictional paradise in James Hilton's novel, Lost Horizon. And while the comparison is romantic, it's not entirely inaccurate. The valley is spectacularly beautiful. Terraced fields cascade down hillsides, green against brown rock. Apricot trees, for which Hunza is famous, bloom in spring, covering the landscape in white and pink. And above it all, Rakaposhi rises to 7,788 meters, its snow-capped peak visible from almost everywhere in the valley. Rakaposhi is often called the most beautiful mountain in the Karakoram. Not the highest, not the most difficult, but the most visually striking. Its name means snow-covered in the local Burushaski language, and the description fits perfectly. The mountain's entire southern face is an unbroken sweep of ice and snow, rising nearly 6,000 vertical meters from the Hunza River. Few mountains anywhere offer such dramatic vertical relief. From valley floor to summit in a single uninterrupted rise, no foothills, no intermediate peaks. Just the mountain, massive and immediate. The first ascent came in 1958 by a British-Pakistani expedition. Mike Banks and Tom Patty reached the summit via the southwest spur. It was only the second 7,000-meter peak climbed in the Karakoram after Nanga Parbat, but Rakaposhi remains dangerous. Avalanches sweep its faces regularly. Weather changes rapidly, and rescue from its upper slopes is nearly impossible. In 1979, a Japanese expedition attempting a new route was hit by an avalanche. 4 climbers died. Their bodies were never recovered, buried somewhere in the tons of snow and ice that swept down the face. Rakaposhi reminds us that beauty and danger coexist in the Karakoram. That a mountain can be breathtaking and lethal simultaneously. That the same slopes that create such stunning views are also death traps waiting to spring. From Hunza, looking up at Rakaposhi on a clear morning, the mountain glows pink in the sunrise. It feels close enough to touch. Close enough that you forget for a moment how utterly inaccessible it actually is. If there's one thing that defines the Karakoram as much as its peaks, it's the weather. Unpredictable, violent, and absolutely unforgiving. The Karakoram sits at the western edge of the monsoon system, but unlike the Himalayas to the east, which receive heavy summer monsoon rains, the Karakoram gets less predictable weather year-round. Storms can arrive without warning. Clear skies at dawn become whiteout conditions by noon. Winds that were manageable at 8 a.m. exceed 100 kilometers per hour by afternoon, and temperature swings are extreme. Daytime temperatures in summer can reach 30 degrees Celsius at lower elevations. But above 6,000 meters, -40 is routine even in July. This variability makes climbing windows narrow and unpredictable. Expeditions can wait weeks at base camp for conditions good enough to attempt a summit push. And even when weather seems stable, it can deteriorate rapidly. The jet stream, a ribbon of high-altitude wind, periodically dips south over the Karakoram. When it does, winds on the peaks exceed 200 kilometers per hour. Nothing can survive in that. No tent, no human. Climbers caught above 7,000 meters in such conditions die quickly. Avalanches are constant. The heavy snows combined with steep slopes mean that any disturbance, a climber's weight, a loud noise, a temperature increase, can trigger massive slides. In 2012, an avalanche on Nanga Parbat killed 11 climbers at base camp. At base camp, a place supposed to be safe. The avalanche traveled over 2 kilometers, sweeping through tents, burying everyone before they could react. Weather in the Karakoram isn't just a challenge, it's an active opponent. And it wins far more often than it loses. Not everything in the Karakoram is defined by death and difficulty. There are places where people have lived for centuries, carving out lives in valleys that seem impossibly remote. Hunza was an independent kingdom until 1974, ruled by mirs, hereditary leaders who governed with near-absolute authority. The kingdom survived for centuries in isolation, protected by mountains and distance from the outside world. Trade was the valley's lifeline. Hunza sat along a branch of the Silk Road, and caravans carrying salt, wool, and turquoise passed through, paying tolls to the mir. The kingdom also had a reputation for raiding. Hunza warriors would ambush caravans, seize goods, and retreat into the mountains. It was the economy of necessity in a place where agriculture alone couldn't sustain the population. The people of Hunza, the Hunzakuts, are ethnically distinct. They speak Burushaski, a language isolate with no known relatives. Linguists still debate its origins, but it remains one of the world's linguistic mysteries. Today, Hunza is no longer independent. It's part of Pakistan's Gilgit-Baltistan region. But the valley retains its character. Villages like Karimabad and Altit perch on hillsides, their stone houses and narrow lanes unchanged for generations. Two fortresses dominate the valley. Baltoro Fort and Altit Fort, both built centuries ago, now serve as museums. Baltoro, perched on a cliff, offers views across the entire valley. Inside, wood-paneled rooms and narrow staircases evoke a time when this was the Mir's residence, the center of power in a kingdom that controlled its own destiny. Hunza is also famous for longevity. Residents claim to live well into their 90s and beyond, attributing their health to diet, clean water from glacial streams, and active lifestyles. Whether the claims are accurate is debated, but the valley's lifestyle, simple, physical, and connected to the land, certainly seems healthier than modern urban existence. The Karakoram Highway runs through Hunza, bringing tourists and change. Hotels and guest houses now line the roads. Internet cafes and mobile phone towers connect the valley to the outside world. And younger generations increasingly leave for education and work in cities. But for now, Hunza remains a place where tradition and modernity coexist. Where apricot orchards still define the rhythm of seasons, and where, on clear mornings, Rakaposhi glows pink in the sunrise, a reminder that beauty and harshness can share the same landscape. If K2 is the Karakoram's most famous mountain, the Karakoram Highway is its most audacious human achievement. Running 1,300 kilometers from Abbottabad in Pakistan to Kashgar in China, the KKH is often called the eighth wonder of the world. And unlike many such claims, this one feels justified. The highway crosses some of the most geologically unstable terrain on Earth. It navigates passes above 4,700 meters. It winds through gorges so narrow that landslides are routine. And it does all this in a region where weather, seismic activity, and gravity conspire to destroy anything humans build. Construction began in 1959, a joint project between Pakistan and China. The political motivations were strategic. China wanted a land route connecting Xinjiang to the Arabian Sea. Pakistan wanted closer ties with China and a counterbalance to India, but the human cost was staggering. 810 Pakistani workers died during construction. 82 Chinese workers died. Most were killed by landslides, rockfalls, and accidents. Some simply disappeared, buried under tons of earth and stone, their bodies never recovered. The New York Times in 1979 wrote, "It took 20 years and the life of one worker for every mile to carve through towering mountains, glaciers, and isolated valleys." That statistic, 1 death per mile, captures the brutality of the project. Workers used hand tools for much of the construction, dynamite for blasting, and sheer physical labor to move millions of tons of rock. The pass at Kunjarab, the border between Pakistan and China, sits at 4,693 meters. It's the highest paved international border crossing in the world. Snow closes it for 6 months each year, and even when open, crossing requires acclimatization and careful timing. The highway transformed the region. Villages that were weeks away by foot are now hours by car. Goods flow between China and Pakistan, and tourism, once non-existent, now brings thousands of visitors annually. But the KKH remains dangerous. Landslides are constant. In 2010, a massive slide near Atabad village blocked the Hunza River, creating a lake 21 kilometers long. Entire sections of the highway were submerged. Villages were evacuated, and for months, the only way across was by boat. Eventually, tunnels were built to bypass the lake, but the incident was a reminder that in the Karakoram, nature always has the final say. Driving the KKH is an experience. The road clings to cliff faces, sometimes just a single lane carved into vertical rock. Drop-offs plunge hundreds of meters, and oncoming traffic, often overloaded trucks, forces nerve-wracking maneuvers on roads with no guardrails. But the views are incomparable. Nanga Parbat, the world's 9th highest peak, looms to the south. The Hunza River churns turquoise below. And at every turn, mountains rise, their scale so immense that perspective breaks down. The KKH is more than infrastructure. It's a testament to what humans will endure to connect the disconnected, to bridge the unbridgeable, and to carve paths through landscapes that were never meant to be crossed. If K2 is the savage mountain, Nanga Parbat is the killer mountain. At 8,126 meters, it's the 9th highest peak on Earth, but its reputation far exceeds its rank. Nanga Parbat's Rupal face, the mountain's south wall, is the highest cliff face on Earth. 4,600 meters of nearly vertical rock and ice. Climbers who attempt it describe it as one of the most technically difficult and dangerous routes in mountaineering. The mountain earned its nickname early. The first attempts in the 1930s and 40s were disasters. Avalanches killed entire teams, storms trapped climbers who froze to death, and the mountain's isolation made rescue impossible. In 1953, Hermann Buhl became the first person to summit Nanga Parbat, but the climb nearly killed him. He made the final push alone, without supplemental oxygen, in deteriorating weather. He spent the night standing on a narrow ledge, unable to sit for fear of falling asleep and dying. When he descended, his feet were frostbitten, he lost toes, but he survived. Nanga Parbat continues to kill. In 2013, Taliban militants attacked base camp, murdering 11 climbers and guides. It was one of the most shocking events in mountaineering history. A reminder that in this region, danger isn't just environmental, it's political. The mountain is visible from the Karakoram Highway near Fairy Meadows, and the view is staggering. Nanga Parbat rises directly from the Indus River Gorge, gaining 7,000 meters of vertical relief in just 20 kilometers. It dominates the horizon, a mass of rock and ice that seems too large to be real. Fairy Meadows itself, despite the whimsical name, is remote. Accessible only by jeep on a road so narrow and exposed that passengers often walk rather than risk the drive. From the meadows, trekkers can hike to base camp, gaining views of the Raikot face. But even this approach requires acclimatization and fitness. The mountains don't offer easy access. If K2 tests altitude endurance, the Trango Towers test something else entirely. Pure technical climbing skill. The towers rise along the Baltoro Glacier like stone cathedrals. Nameless Tower, also called Trango Tower, features the world's highest nearly vertical drop. 1,340 meters of sheer granite, no ledges, no easy routes, just rock. For rock climbers, Trango represents the ultimate challenge. Not because of altitude, though at 6,286 meters, the summit is high enough to cause problems, but because of the wall itself. Climbers spend weeks on the face. They sleep in portaledges, fabric platforms suspended from the rock. They haul gear in bags weighing hundreds of pounds, and they climb pitches so difficult that even elite climbers struggle. The first ascent of Nameless Tower came in 1976. Since then, dozens of routes have been established, each pushing the limits of what's possible on vertical terrain. But Trango isn't just for elite climbers. Trekkers passing on the Baltoro can see the towers from below. And the sight is humbling. These aren't mountains in the traditional sense. They're walls, stone skyscrapers rising from glacial debris. The towers remind us that the Karakoram contains infinite variety. It's not just one type of challenge. It's a range that offers something for everyone willing to risk everything. Before K2 became synonymous with death, there was hope, ambition, the belief that humans could stand where no one had stood before. In 1954, an Italian expedition led by Audacious set out to summit K2. The team was large by modern standards: 11 climbers, dozens of porters. Tons of equipment hauled across the Baltoro Glacier. The route they chose was the Abruzzi Spur, the southeast ridge. First attempted in 1909 by the Duke of Abruzzi, the ridge offered the most logical line to the summit. Steep but climbable, dangerous but not suicidal. The expedition established a series of camps. Camp 1 at 6,000 meters, Camp 2 at 6,700, Camp 3 at 7,000, and so on, each higher, each colder, each more exposed. On July 31st, 2 climbers made the final push, Achille Compagnoni and Lino Lacedelli. They left Camp 9 at dawn, carrying oxygen bottles that were running low. The climb was brutal. The final slopes were steeper than expected. The snow was unstable, and the cold was worse than anything they'd experienced. But at 6 p.m. they reached the summit. The first humans to stand on K2's peak, they planted the Italian flag, took a few photos, and immediately began descending. Because on K2, summiting is only halfway. The real challenge is getting down alive. Compagnoni and Lacedelli descended in darkness. They bivouacked at 8,100 meters without shelter. Lacedelli lost his gloves and suffered severe frostbite. Compagnoni's feet froze. But they survived. And when they reached base camp days later, they were heroes. Italy celebrated, the world marveled, and K2 briefly seemed conquerable. That optimism wouldn't last. The mountain's true nature would reveal itself in the decades to come. Every K2 expedition depends on them. Yet their names rarely appear in climbing reports. Their achievements go uncelebrated. The Balti Porters. These men, mostly from villages around Skardu and Ascole, carry loads that would cripple most Western trekkers. 25 kilograms is standard, some carry 30. 35. They walk in thin sandals or boots held together with tape. Their clothing is often inadequate for the cold. A thin jacket, cotton pants, maybe a wool hat. And yet they move across terrain that challenges experienced mountaineers with thousands of dollars worth of gear. The Balti have been doing this for over a century. When early expeditions came to K2 in the 1900s, local men were hired as porters. It was dangerous work, poorly paid. But it was work. Over generations, a culture developed. Families specialized in high-altitude porterage. Skills were passed down. Routes memorized, and a reputation built for toughness and reliability. Today, Balti porters remain essential. Without them, base camps wouldn't exist, supplies wouldn't reach climbers, expeditions would fail before they started. But the economics are brutal. Porters earn a fraction of what guides make. They have no insurance, no equipment provided, and if they're injured or die, their families receive minimal compensation. In 1995, 6 Balti porters were killed in an avalanche on K2. Their deaths barely registered in international media. No memorials, no tributes. Just 6 more casualties in a region where death is routine. The porters know the risks, but options are limited. Agriculture in Baltistan yields little. Jobs are scarce, and porterage, for all its dangers, pays better than alternatives. Some porters have become high-altitude climbers themselves. Men like Hasan Sadpara, who summited 8 8,000-meter peaks before his death in 2019. Or Ali Sadpara, who disappeared on K2 in 2021 during a winter attempt. These men challenged the narrative that Westerners alone could climb the world's highest peaks. They proved that skill, strength, and determination aren't limited by nationality or wealth. But for every Balti climber who gains recognition, hundreds remain anonymous. Carrying loads, making expeditions possible, and returning home to families who depend on the income. The next time you see a K2 summit photo, remember, that climber didn't get there alone. Dozens of Balti porters made it possible. They hauled the tents, the food, the oxygen, the ropes. They are the foundation. Invisible, indispensable, and tragically underappreciated. The Karakoram isn't just geography, it's geopolitics. The region sits at the intersection of 3 nuclear-armed nations, Pakistan, India, and China. And the borders here are contested, militarized, and dangerous. The Siachen Glacier, the world's highest battlefield, lies at the eastern edge of the Karakoram. Indian and Pakistani troops have faced off here since 1984. Fighting not just each other, but the environment. At elevations above 6,000 meters, temperatures drop to -70 degrees Celsius. More soldiers die from cold, altitude, and avalanches than from combat. It's a war that makes no strategic sense, but neither side will back down. The line of control, the de facto border between Indian and Pakistani Kashmir, runs through the Karakoram. It's heavily militarized, minefields, artillery positions, forward operating bases, and the Karakoram Highway itself is strategic. China built it not just for trade, but to project power. The highway allows rapid military deployment from Xinjiang to Pakistan's northern regions, and Pakistan benefits from Chinese investment and infrastructure. India views the KKH with suspicion. The highway crosses territory. India claims as its own, and Chinese presence in the region is seen as encirclement. For travelers, this geopolitics is mostly invisible. But it's always there. Military checkpoints, restricted zones, areas where photography is forbidden. The Karakoram is beautiful, but it's also a reminder that mountains don't prevent conflict. Sometimes they're where conflicts freeze in place, becoming permanent features of the landscape. At the end of a long, rough road branching off the Karakoram Highway lies Shimshal, the highest village in Pakistan with road access. Reaching Shimshal requires commitment. The road, barely more than a jeep track, climbs through narrow gorges and crosses unstable slopes. Rockfall is common, and in winter the road closes entirely, isolating the village for months. Shimshal sits at 3,100 meters. About 2,000 people live here, mostly Wakhi-speaking Ismailis. For centuries, Shimshal was accessible only by foot. Residents walked for days to reach Hunza Valley for supplies. The road arrived in 2003, and with it, change. Before the road, Shimshal's economy depended on herding and mountaineering. Many of Pakistan's best high-altitude porters and guides come from Shimshal. These men have summited K2, Nanga Parbat, and other 8,000-meter peaks. They earn money supporting expeditions, then return home to their families and fields. Now, tourism supplements traditional livelihoods. Trekkers come to explore the Shimshal Valley, hike to Shimshal Pass, or attempt nearby peaks like Distagil Sar, a 7,885-meter giant that remains relatively unclimbed. The village is stark but beautiful. Stone houses cluster along the Shimshal River. Fields of barley and potatoes terrace the slopes. And above it all, mountains rise, their summits often hidden in clouds. Life here is hard. Winters are brutal. Supplies are expensive, hauled in by jeep over roads that destroy vehicles. And medical care is minimal. Serious illnesses require evacuation to Gilgit, hours away. But the people of Shimshal are proud. They've survived in one of the most remote corners of the Karakoram for generations, and they have no intention of leaving. Shimshal represents something important. The idea that humans can live almost anywhere if they're determined enough. That isolation isn't synonymous with poverty, and that communities can thrive on the edge of the possible. K2 dominates the Karakoram's reputation, but it's not alone. Broad Peak at 8,051 meters is the world's 12th highest mountain. Its name comes from its elongated summit ridge, over a kilometer long. Unlike K2's pyramid, Broad Peak sprawls across the horizon. Climbers often attempt Broad Peak as preparation for K2. The mountain is technically less difficult, though still extremely dangerous. Death rates are lower, around 10%, but that's still 1 in 10, still lethal. The first ascent came in 1957 by an Austrian team. Fritz Wintersteller, Markus Schmuck, Kurt Diemberger and Hermann Buhl. They climbed without supplemental oxygen and without high-altitude porters, an impressive feat for the era. Buhl, who had soloed Nanga Parbat 4 years earlier, was one of mountaineering's legends, but even he couldn't escape the Karakoram forever. In 1957, just weeks after summiting Broad Peak, he fell to his death on nearby Chogolesa. The mountains claimed another life. The Gasherbrum Massif contains two 8,000-meter peaks. Gasherbrum 1, also called Hidden Peak, rises to 8,080 meters. Gasherbrum 2 reaches 8,035 meters. Both are challenging. Both have killed dozens. What makes the Karakoram unique isn't just individual peaks, it's concentration. Within a 20-kilometer radius of K2's summit, there are 5 other peaks above 7,500 meters. The density of high-altitude terrain is unmatched anywhere else on Earth. For mountaineers, this creates opportunity. Climbers can attempt multiple peaks in a single season, moving between base camps, acclimatizing, and pushing for summits. But it also creates risk. The more time spent at altitude, the greater the cumulative stress on the body. High-altitude cerebral edema, pulmonary edema, and blood clots become more likely. And rescue, if needed, is nearly impossible from these remote valleys. Before reaching the mountains, climbers pass through Skardu, a town at 2,230 meters, surrounded by brown hills and the Indus River. Skardu is the logistical hub for Karakoram expeditions. Permits are processed here, supplies are purchased, porters are hired, and last-minute preparations are made before the long trek to base camps. The town itself is unremarkable. Dusty streets, simple hotels, markets selling everything from dried apricots to climbing gear. But Skardu has history. It was the capital of Baltistan, a region with strong Tibetan Buddhist influences before converting to Islam centuries ago. Rock carvings and old monasteries in nearby valleys hint at this past. Above Skardu, Karpocho Fort perches on a rocky outcrop. Built in the 16th century, it once controlled the trade routes through Baltistan. Today, it's a ruin. But the views from its walls are spectacular. The Indus Valley spreading below, mountains rising in every direction. Skardu is also the jumping-off point for the Deosai Plateau, a vast highland at over 4,000 meters. Often called the Land of Giants, Deosai is one of the highest plateaus in the world. In summer, wildflowers carpet the grasslands, and Himalayan brown bears, rare elsewhere, are common here. For many travelers, Skardu is just a stopover, a place to catch your breath before the real journey begins. But it's worth pausing. Worth recognizing that even the gateway sits higher than most mountains in other parts of the world. The Wakhi people inhabit one of the most isolated regions of the Karakoram. They live in narrow valleys along the Afghan and Pakistani border, speaking a distinct Indo-European language. For centuries, Wakhi communities survived through herding, farming, and trade. They moved seasonally with their yaks, grazing them in high pastures in summer and descending to lower valleys in winter. The Wakhan Corridor, a narrow strip of Afghan territory extending between Tajikistan and Pakistan, was once a vital Silk Road route. Marco Polo passed through in the 13th century. Traders carried goods between Central Asia and the Indian subcontinent. But modern borders cut through Wakhi territory. Families were separated, trade routes closed, and the Wakhi found themselves marginalized, their traditional ways of life increasingly difficult to maintain. Today, Wakhi communities face challenges. Young people leave for cities, traditional languages are eroding, and climate change is disrupting seasonal patterns that herders depend on. But the Waki endure. They maintain their culture, their hospitality, and their connection to a landscape that most people couldn't survive in for a week. Visiting a Waki village is humbling. You're welcomed into stone houses with dirt floors, offered tea and bread, treated as a guest despite your obvious difference, and reminded that hospitality in these mountains isn't optional, it's survival. The Waki have a saying, "A guest is a gift from God." In a place where survival depends on mutual support, generosity isn't virtue, it's necessity. The Karakoram is changing. Climate change is accelerating glacial melt. Temperatures are rising, and the landscape is transforming in ways that local populations struggle to adapt to. Glaciers that once advanced are now retreating. Glacial lake outburst floods, or geolofts, are becoming more frequent. These occur when meltwater accumulates behind ice or moraine dams, then suddenly breaks through, sending floods downstream that destroy everything in their path. In 2022, catastrophic flooding in Pakistan killed over 1,700 people and displaced millions. Much of the damage occurred in regions fed by Karakoram glaciers. The floods were a preview of what's coming as the climate continues to warm. For mountaineers, the changes are noticeable. Routes that were once stable are now prone to rockfall. Ice cliffs collapse more frequently, and weather patterns, already unpredictable, are becoming even more erratic. Tourism is also increasing. The Karakoram Highway has made the region more accessible, and with that accessibility comes pressure. More trekkers, more climbers, more waste, more strain on communities that lack infrastructure to support large numbers of visitors. Balancing development with preservation is the challenge. The Karakoram's communities need economic opportunities, but unchecked tourism risks destroying the very qualities that make the region unique. There's also militarization. The ongoing tensions between Pakistan and India mean that military presence will likely increase. More bases, more checkpoints, more restrictions on where travelers can go. And then there's China. The Belt and Road Initiative includes massive infrastructure projects in Pakistan. Roads, dams, power plants, these bring development, but they also bring environmental impact and cultural change. The Karakoram of 2050 will look different from the Karakoram of today. The question is whether that change will be managed sustainably or whether short-term gains will sacrifice long-term preservation. Standing in the Karakoram, surrounded by peaks that pierce the sky, you understand something fundamental about the natural world. It doesn't care about you. These mountains existed long before humans arrived. They'll exist long after we're gone. And while we can climb them, photograph them, even name them, we never truly conquer them. K2 will continue to kill climbers. The Karakoram Highway will require constant repair. Glaciers will melt and reform. And the people who call this place home will continue adapting as they have for centuries. The Karakoram isn't a destination, it's a reminder. That nature operates on scales we can barely comprehend. That survival here requires humility. And that beauty and danger are often inseparable. For every climber who summits K2, another doesn't return. For every traveler who drives the KKH safely, another faces rockfall or accident. For every village that thrives, another struggles against isolation and change. This is the savage mountain range, more dangerous than Everest, more remote than the Himalayas, and more unforgiving than almost anywhere else on Earth. The Karakoram doesn't invite you, it tolerates you, and if you make a mistake, it will kill you without hesitation or regret. But for those who respect it, who approach it with humility rather than hubris, the Karakoram offers something rare. A glimpse of Earth as it existed before humans. Raw, powerful, indifferent to our presence. K2's summit remains. The Baltoro Glacier flows. The Hunza River carves its gorge. And the people of these mountains continue living lives that most of us couldn't imagine. The question isn't whether the Karakoram is dangerous. It is, objectively, mathematically, lethally dangerous. The question is why people keep coming, why they risk everything for a chance to stand on a summit. To drive a road built on bones, to live in valleys where survival is never guaranteed. The answer, perhaps, is that some places demand more of us. They force us to confront our limits, to test whether we're as capable as we believe, to discover whether courage and skill are enough when nature holds all the cards. The Karakoram offers no guarantees, no safety nets, no easy victories. But it offers truth about the world, about ourselves, about the thin line between achievement and disaster. And for some, that's worth everything. This is the Karakoram, the savage mountains. More dangerous than Everest. And it's waiting. Not for conquest, but for those brave or foolish enough to try.